Firstly, James Pietersen. I'm CEO from Wine Cellar. Been in the wine industry for roughly over 25 years. And the career is very simple. I knocked on doors and went through them and kind of got myself to this point by just loving wine, tasting it, talking about it and engaging and finding it an incredibly interesting topic. My journey started in restaurants like it does often, finding this niche and incredible product, learning a lot from other people, and then meandering through the world of fine wine buying, sommelier as a kind of pastime on the wine floor, and then finally into joining Wine Cellar, which is one of South Africa's premier fine wine merchants. So that's the long and the short. As a CEO, I kind of really enjoy the role to bring wine to our clients. We like to say that we're there to solve the joy of wine, to see all the problems that you have, be it storage, be it wine tasting, be it great product selection, be it value, be it events, be it investment portfolios, and like the story today, bringing us to understand, why vintage wines are really important and when to drink them.
Lovely. Can we swap jobs? It sounds like you've got an amazing job.
I have an amazing job, that's for sure. And really, this is following a passion, and drinking wine has got me to this position. And we always want to talk about fine wine, about this product that I believe is one of the absolutely the greatest kind of agricultural products in the world. It's an artifact and something that we are very privileged to enjoy in South Africa and a great sense of detail.
Oh, that's stunning. That's brilliant. So you touch a little bit on the topic for today, which is brilliant. It's one of the most debated topics, and a topic that I feel there's not a lot of widespread information, there's not a lot of general understanding about it. But what is the difference that aging a bottle of wine makes? Why is it so important to get your wines a little bit older?
Wine is interesting. Wine goes through a few phases. We speak about the primary phase, you've got secondary kind of elements in a wine, and you've got your kind of tertiary stage. And wine has the ability to mature and evolve. So wine has the ability to change and become more interesting or better or more complex. And all of that is obviously subjective. It's in the eye of the beholder. So this is a grand part of the grape journey. Cognac, which is also a grape journey, whiskey, which is another product. These are elements that can give you a little bit of that, but none of them can do it like wine does. And I think why it's important is that wine is this ultimate product that can serve as a snapshot of a time and place. I've had some great wines in the past, wines that are 20, 30, 40 years old, even older. But you drink the wine and you go like, where was I in 1988? And you get a picture of a time and a place. And that wine transports you to that place. At the same time, that wine is trying to tell you a story of where it was in that time and place. Be it a hill in Piedmont, snowy, desperate kind of a political situation in Italy, etc., etc. The wine kind of captures that little moment. So I really think the subjectivity is really crucial to it. The fact that there is something to be found is crucial to it. The fact that it's a kind of a biological product that does move with time, but there is no, objective science to it. Shall we jump into what tertiary, secondary and primary would mean?
I think that's a great idea.
It gives people a bit of context.
Yeah, of course, yeah. So jump into that.
So I think let's use Cabernet Sauvignon as a grape variety, because I think it's crucial. Aging really speaks to Cabernet Sauvignon, it's really crucial. The Bordelais have really put Cabernet on the map in terms of a wine variety that needs time. So when you pick Cabernet Sauvignon, you've got the grapes off the vine. Immediately you get those primary fruit elements, and this is what we speak of as primary notes in a glass of wine. Once that's crushed, you'll get a lot of those aromatics and those elements that you would expect to get from a grape berry, and especially from a Cabernet grape berry would be like cassis, blackberries, mulberries, those kind of things. So those are your primary elements. There's a little bit of herbaceousness and all those relatively distinct aromatics that you get off a young wine. Your secondary elements would be kind of winemaking elements. These will be applied to if you've added some oak to the wine. So if you get a bit of vanilla and spice and clove, nutmeg, all those elements. So those will be your secondary elements. These would include elements like lees aging on champagne, where you get brioche and breadiness, which is all part of the autolytic space. In a white wine, you can get lovely vanilla and kind of those lactones from the oak barrels. You can get a creamy butteriness you get from stirring the white wine. So those are your secondary notes. Kind of, you could say it's a little bit of something that man adds to the wine and kind of interacts with the primary state of the wine. So those secondary aromas have a longer journey. Primary is a time frame. Secondary will be part of the wine's journey and will also kind of contribute to kind of tertiary elements. Tertiary is when you get to the wine and it's say 10, 15 years old. The fruit kind of fades. You still get a fruit, but the fruit is less kind of delineated. It's more like kind of, you get a sense of there's berries in here, but they're not kind of pure, distinct kind of, this is cassis and that's a loganberry and that's blackberry. You've got more kind of a melange, but then you've got secondary and third waves of flavors that support it. And these will be elements like pipe tobacco, some earthiness, gravelly elements, kind of further evolutions of spice from the oak that the wine was in. Or in the case of champagne, the older the champagne is, the more kind of brioche or doughy or savory the element would be on those. So much more esoteric kind of elements that create a lot of excitement, crushed flowers, a sense of decay, autumn forest, all those elements. So that's primary, secondary, and tertiary. And they, you can see, add a lot of fun to the experience of wine as it matures.
You've made me want to age my Cabernets, if I'm honest with you. That's a really lovely description, and I think a really nice line to walk down. Let's jump to the glass of wine that you've got there.
Yeah.
2015 Estate Cabernet Sauvignon. You recently tasted with a Wine Mag 2015 vintage 10-year release. Walk us through that tasting. What did you learn from the 2015 vintage, and how do you feel it translates into that glass that you've got in your hand right now?
Jeremy, thanks for the glass of wine. I really need that at the end of a warm day in a cool cellar. It's perfect. Waterford 2015 Cab, a classic example of wine that's entering its kind of mature window. So it's got nice tertiary elements on it. I always speak of, you want to see a kind of a cascading of tannin, and you want to see a flow of primary. You almost want to have a sense of imagination of that the fruit has had like a elegant, slow kind of evolution into kind of tertiary flavors. Classic cab aromatics of a nice tobacco. I get a bit of earth. It's got that sense of black fruit underneath. And on the panel with Wine Mag tasting the 2015 vintage, you got a sense that it was a really quality vintage. I've done, I think, about 11 of these 10-year-old verticals with Wine Mag. So we've looked at all the vintages from, I want to say 2002 or 2003 would have been the first one. And crucially, they do show you that great vintages come through, and they are important. And I think they've become more important in the South African landscape. Obviously, South African history, and it's a little bit important to segue into this. The 2015 vintage was a kind of a breakout vintage. It was a vintage that was proper 10 years after we kind of entered the new world of winemaking. It already felt the effects of the Swartland Revolution, where young winemakers were much more kind of dynamic in their approach. They were drinking the best wines in the world. There were lots of kind of more non-interventionist, simpler, purer winemaking that was involved, and we saw that in kind of 2015 vintage, almost coming to an apex, where the winemaker's skill was much more innate rather than looking outside. We were less reliant on new oak. It was less kind of chasing physiological ripeness. It was less chasing Parker scores. So there was much more response to the vintage rather than trying to make a big, massive wine kind of in an international style. So we were very excited when the vintage came out back in 2015. We thought, let's tell the world about it. We put an incredible kind of vintage pack together, where we called it VIP, Vintage Investment Pack of 2015s, and identified the wines we thought were the wines that could mature. So Cabernet based would be your kind of first port of call. So tasting those wines with Wine Mag was crucial because it answered and delivered on our expectation, which was the #1 prize. And secondly, it makes me very excited for the future of our future great vintages. You think of 2017 coming up, and you're thinking of 2021 as the next vintages that were the great vintages. So the proof was in the pudding. The wines were that good, and they showed great kind of maturation and freshness. I would say overall 2015s are just starting to enter a drinking window. What we mean by a drinking window, we mean that the wine kind of has matured and softened, and it won't change that much over the next few years. You know, where you think in your first 3 to 5 years, your wine, especially Cabernet Sauvignon, will change quite a bit. But then it kind of reaches a drinking window where there's a lovely harmony between the acidity, the kind of polymerized tannin, softness, integrated fruit, and especially the texture. A lot of people drink mature wines because they like the complexity of all the flavors and aromas, but also mostly the texture. You know, the tannins are softer, that so-called velvety, plush kind of feel that you get from it.
Now, I mean, I'm not too sure which order you're more a fan of. Do you typically go younger wines and then older? Or are we doing it in a reverse to what you normally drink?
Fabulous question. I like doing it both. It's always, whoever does the tasting has to build in their mind the kind of story they want to tell. And that's where vintage wines as they mature become a very interesting vehicle to tell a story. I recently did a vertical of a lot of Chenin Blancs. I did them from old to young, which is pretty logical because you want to tell the story from where it begins to where it ends. The takeaway was that the wines at the end were of the best wines, but they were so simple that there wasn't that much joy in them. Subsequently, and this was a 10-15 year span of a winemaker, and this is a little bit of a segue now, but it tells you the kind of snapshot of South African story. The winemaker's journey of learning how to work with this vineyard, you could see took its toll in the first 5 years. So the wines were quite up and down. There's some great ones, but they're okay ones. But generally, you could see all the learning. The next 5 vintages really you could see the confidence of the winemaker and a much true reflection of really what the vintage was. And the great vintages, the wines were awesome. So that sweet spot, those were the better wines. But unfortunately, because of that, the youngest wine, which was from great vintage, was so well made that you could almost not get any pleasure from it because it's too young. Subsequently, I did tasting with the same winemaker's wines, but only from the back end. So the more confident, knowing what he's doing kind of space. And there I flipped it around. There I tasted the young wines first and ending with a great kind of mature wine to show people the complexity. So how you taste wines is really up to you, and there's lots to be learned from in different directions.
Could I drop another glass of wine in your hand there?
Yes.
To ask you to...
I'd love that.
Not to fill your hands with too many wines, but I think it would be divine to get your feelings and your notes on the 2018 vintage and then moving to the 2015.
Yeah.
3 years in the span of a wine's life is quite a small tick, but enough to make a difference, I feel. How do you note the difference between those wines?
Yeah, so there's an immediate difference here. Obviously, I've acclimatized to the 15, so I'm really enjoying it. And I like my cab to be mature. But on this one, I get a sense of, there's a little bit of reduction. So reduction would be something that is a wine term where the wine is a little bit quiet, showing a little bit of a interaction with sulfur, but it's a good thing. It means the wine is inert and it needs a bit of time to be agitated in the glass or decanted. I also note more of the oak notes on here. So immediately kind of the secondary involvement of the winemaker is more prominent here, where on this side the oak is completely assimilated. It's a different vintage. So 18 is I find a softer vintage in South Africa. So the wine does have on the nose a little bit more red fruited freshness to it. And I'm just going to give it a taste to see where it goes, where it lands. That's a lovely bit of cola, a bit of that mocha note from the oak, a little bit of cocoa dust, nice kind of sense of cherry and plums at the bottom. Palate's gentle, it's already drinking nicely. And I think that's more got to do with the 18 vintage, which I find is a softer vintage. Lovely balance, nothing wrong with drinking this already, but it doesn't have the layers and complexity of the 15. But I think it's 2 reasons. The one is, it's not quite the vintage that 15 was. And secondly, it doesn't have that age on it that gives it a bit more complexity. But I would almost drink this next year onwards already and drink these more slowly. You know, treat yourself to a 15, but keep these longer, where I think 18 will probably mature a little bit faster. And with mature, just reach that peak quite faster. Yeah.
If you're someone at home that's looking to age their wine. They don't necessarily have all the gadgets and all the bells and whistles that would be the ideal storage. What do you think someone could do at home to achieve those conditions, and what are those conditions?
You know, the first thing I would say is like make sure you like mature wines. So that's quite an interesting thing that I think hopefully this gets to some young people as well. It's really try and find wine friends, people that have collected too much wines in their lives, but just stick your nose in some older wines now and again. It's crucial because there is an acclimatization. It's learning to enjoy olives if you don't like olives, or to enjoy something that's quite, you know, funky and more sophisticated. Find out whether you like mature wines. And I think there's a big difference between mature red wines and mature white wines. So red wines, if you want to keep them, I think Cabernet Sauvignon, a good rule of thumb is 5 to 10 years is a good time. Five years to start interacting with it. They should go 20 years plus. For your home cellar, ideal. There are three things that are crucial to wine maturation. Constant temperature, no sunlight, no direct light, and kind of vibration free. And obviously you want an area with a kind of 70% humidity. None of those are deal breakers if you drink your wine quite quickly. So if you have mature wines at home and drink them within a 2-3 year period, constant temperature is probably the only one that's really important. Direct sunlight, obviously, as well. Temperature is an interesting one because anything below 18 degrees is a safe space to keep your wine. You know, nothing's going to happen to it. The theory is, though, that between 12 and 18, the lower you go, the slower the wine evolves. We all know the greatest bottles of wine you can ever have is the wine that was in this vat over here, went straight into the bottle, was parked down there, and it didn't move, and that temperature was constant. It didn't see any sunlight, didn't move. That bottle's always going to beat any bottle that went into a case, got onto a cool truck, got delivered to your house, and then goes into storage. So standing still in one place, as cool as possible, a constant, that is your win. And as long as you can do that at home as much as you can, it's fine. Wine is also much more robust than we think. A great bottle of wine can take quite a hammering. It's really quite interesting. I've had some bottles of wine where the ullage, so that's the part between the neck and the top where it's dropped down quite a bit. The kind of wine where you think, it's finished. Cork's leaking, etc. Where you touch it and the cork drops in and the wine is amazing. And then I've had wines where it's pristine, absolutely 100%. There's from the same wine, same vintage, you know, so they're next to each other, where that bottle is not as good as that terrible one. So there's this old saying that, you know, if you buy 12 bottles of wine, the longer they mature them, the more you get to the end, you get to a point where there's no such thing as a great wine, there's just a great bottle. So wine, we must remember, is also an individual product in a moment in time. It sits in a bottle with a cork in it, which is another kind of natural product which influences, and that bottle of wine can be better than any of the other bottles of wine that was made from that estate. You know, so a bottle of wine is also a special thing and contributes to a bit of history and a story.
I can tell that you're a romantic about wine.
Yes, you have to be. Wine comes with a story.
Oh, of course, yeah. So, in your opinion, in your expertise and your experience with wine, how do you determine how long a particular vintage or a particular wine, how long can you age it for? How long until you know that wine's going to get to its peak?
I think that's a bit of a guesstimate, and that's part of the world of experience, and there's no rules of thumb. Generally, you look at the acidity of wine, tannin structure of the wine, and intensity of fruit. And you're looking at the trilogy of that balance. The more balanced the wine is, the more you expect it to mature harmoniously. The denser the tannin, or the quality of the tannin, the more you expect that it has got longevity in it. The higher the acidity, the longer you think it expect it to last. And obviously sugar plays a big role. The longest living wines, obviously, let's not forget, wines with massive amount of sugar. So let's stick to Cabernet Sauvignon because it becomes very complicated if we look at everything else. But Cabernet Sauvignon as a grape variety is a small berry. Juice to tannin ratio is quite little. Every grape variety has got a different kind of tannin structure and a different tannin personality, if it's a great and special wine. And Cabernet Sauvignon has got a distinct structure. I like to call it the railway structure. You know, it lays down the tracks and it tells you where it's going to go. What would be a different kind of tannin structure would be something like Nebbiolo, which is a grape variety from northern Italy, where it's got the tannins are much more on the side. They're very drying, but they kind of like pull your mouth in different directions. Grenache's tannin structure is again on the outside, but quite soft, but brownish, kind of autumnish, and they lie long in the side of your mouth. So each of those grape varieties have different tannin structure. Cabernet Sauvignon, railroad, it needs a certain amount of time just for those kind of elements to break down a little bit, to soften the wine. South Africa, normal vintage, 5 to 8 years. Great vintages, 10 years plus. And then what happens is you get to taste the wines now and again and go like, well, that's a great vintage for this producer specifically. And then it becomes a great bottle of wine. And a great bottle of wine, then every now and again you're lucky to have it and you can go like, well, this one is still on the up. So you can add another 3-4 years. So when you would taste a wine, like let's say we take the Waterford 2015 that I have in my hand. This wine is just entering its drinking window. I'm happy it's easily got to its 10-year space. It's got nice earth, the density is there. And what happens with the Cabernet Sauvignon as it matures, that, you know, that kind of tannin breaks down and kind of fills your mouth. It kind of builds a little belly at the bottom. And you want that texture, it's almost like salt sand. You know, it's like it gives it more weight. But on top of that are flavors and complexity and layers, and at the same time there's a freshness of acidity. Acidity is not harsh, the flavors are complex and intriguing, the aromatics kind of intrigue you and pull you in, but then it settles in your mouth with that savory moorishness. And remember, moorishness is such an overused or easy word, but moorishness, at the end of the day, this is a beverage and something that wants to refresh you. And if you get that sense of moorish and you want to have more and more, it means the wine has got an upside to it. It means it's still going further. And this wine has got an upside. There's no tiring lag, it doesn't stick in your mouth. So this I would think would easily reach 20 years. It could change quite a bit in the last 3 to 4 years, but yeah.
I like that. That was stunning. And you touch a little bit on wines we have here in South Africa. So how do South African wines age in comparison to the old world standard?
If we go back a little bit, very well. So it's quite a long story probably, but let me see if I can speed it up. Of the greatest wines I've ever had, so one of my, say, top 5 wines would be a 1957 Chateau Libertas, which I had just a few years ago. One of the other, say, top 20 wines would be the GS 1966 from South Africa, proving that these wines, South African wines, can mature 20, 30, 40, 60 years. And I've had quite a few from the 60s, etc. So South African wines, we know, can mature. They can last very long. Then we have to add history on top of that. Winemaking, time and space, how people interact with it, what they thought, what they brought to the table. We were out of the mix for quite some time. White wine was quite fashionable. Sweet wines were the de rigueur kind of way of making stuff. Back in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, South Africa probably had 12, say 18 red wines, bottled red wines. Red wine was rare, it was scarce, so whoever made red wine, made proper red wine. They made red wine for a serious moment, and red wines were made expecting it to last. So that's where red wine was. Fast forward to us entering the world of wine again, and you've got a whole plethora of people just making red wine and thinking they can produce great red wines. Of the first instances of something that's important in changing how we made wine was small new barrels. So these came in the 80s. That changed the way that we made wine quite a bit. South Africa, would we have gotten the best barrels in the world? I doubt it. So that would have changed our winemaking. There was a so-called Mr. Robert Parker that kind of chased physiological ripeness, alcohol ripeness in wines. We kind of followed that kind of route. We looked outside to find out how we should make wines. And I don't believe the wines from the 80s and the 90s have the longevity of the previous realm, but I do believe that what we're doing now, post 2015, we'll probably start seeing producers making wines that can, again, age 30, 40, 50, 60 years. That said, 99 Cab from, say, Peter Barlow, awesome, bulletproof wine. There's some other greats. some of the old KWV Rudebergs from the 80s. Every time I pull a cork, they're fantastic. So there were some successes as well. And even the Chateau Libertas wines from the late 70s and early 80s. So our red wines can mature. I think we're going to see better maturation from them in the future. The wines are, however, made in a lighter style, so we will learn in time how important tannin density is in terms of longevity, and how important acidity is. The old school wines were 12.5% alcohol. We've kind of went right up to 14, 14.5, 15 plus. Now we're moving back to, cabs around 14%, other red wines 13.5 for like really fine wine positioning.
You tell a really good story, James, just by the way. And I'm in awe with the wines that you've had the opportunity to drink. That's amazing.
Yeah, but, and this speaks to something else that's really important in the South African industry. And it's almost like a plea, and I do have little whispers in people's ears, but those people that have, like I include myself as a company that has access to great wines, I like to bring young people into the company, into the mix. We share quite a bit of wine. We taste wine regularly. Duncan Savage is down the road from us, and he's got a young, nice crew as well. And drinking older wines with younger people is crucial to the industry. And the access to mature wines, especially of quality, is going to become more and more important for us to make sure that the generational shift of people believing in the magic of wine does happen. Because if you haven't had a great definitive bottle of wine that makes you understand what a mature wine can taste like, you're not going to believe it can happen. So this is a crucial kind of shift in the story, is to bring mature wines to the younger audience, and they need to taste them. They need to taste them and experience them. And you can't open them at a stand in a room where there are 30 or 40 people trying to taste wines and go like, here's a mature wine. You have to land at the mature wine with the right attitude. You need to be guided there. Otherwise you're just going to go like, well, this isn't great. Because volatility, which is VA, is a balsamic vinegar kind of element, or just vinegar, off-putting. Shoe polish is a wonderful element of older mature wines, but at the right time it's intriguing and interesting, at the wrong time it's really off-putting. And I like them in a wine in a certain stage. Same with how many people like earthiness or savoriness, and when do they enjoy that? Do they understand that? So that's quite a tricky thing.